Welcome to the Garden of Sacred Tears podcast, conversations with counseling psychologist Dr. Aman Kwatra. This is a podcast about grief, about loss, and mental health. For in loss, there is a deep emptiness, and hidden within the heart of this emptiness is a doorway to profound transformation. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Dr. Aman Kwatra, and this is the Garden of Sacred Tears podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Garden of Sacred Tears podcast. My name is Dr. Aman Kwatra, and I'm a counselling psychologist based in Ireland. It's such a pleasure being here with you today, and thank you so much for joining me. This podcast is all about conversations about grief, loss, bereavement, and mental health. In my work as a psychologist, and also my work previously in the field of international development and post-war reconstruction, I've learned that grief is a human condition that we all experience, but often enough we experience it deeply alone. And that sense of being alone in that journey can be quite challenging. That led me to set up the Garden of Sacred Tears, which is a private psychology practice specializing in supporting people experiencing grief, loss, and bereavement. When I talk about loss, of course, I mean loss of many different forms. That could be loss of a loved one, but it could also be loss of a life expectation, a dream, a desire, any significant loss that we can experience in our lives. Loss of hope, loss of a business venture, loss of a sense of purpose in life or meaning, or parenthood, experiencing infertility. There are just so many different kind of losses that we all experience. The Garden of Sacred Tears is an organization that is trying to support people experiencing these different kinds of losses. The podcast is all about conversations about grief, loss, and mental health. It's to support people embrace self-care and self-compassion on this journey of recovering from grief, because I've found in my experience, in my spiritual experience, in my work as a psychologist, that deep within the experience of loss, there is emptiness, and deep within that emptiness is a doorway to profound transformation. And that's something that I'm trying to work in and support people who might be experiencing grief and loss, transform their life into a more purposeful, meaningful, and healed step. But I want to talk to you today a little bit about myself, to introduce myself, and also talk about the Garden of Sacred Tears, to introduce the organization. I grew up in India, and ever since I was a small young boy growing up in Delhi, I was searching for. Now, this is a tricky bit because it's very hard to talk about what I wanted to search, because I didn't really understand it at all at the time. Some people called it enlightenment, some people called it Tao. Some people called it illumination. Some people called it, the search for life, search for meaning. But essentially what I really wanted to do is I wanted to understand myself, and I wanted to understand the world that I was living in. Now, there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of inner turmoil. There was a lot of emotions. There was a whole context to this. But anyway, the young me, the 7, 8, 9-year-old me, decided that I was going to look for enlightenment. But there was no clear path to it. I mean, I was profoundly influenced by the journey of the Buddha, and also the journey of other rishis and gurus and yogis and philosophers, both in India and globally. And I was ready to set off on this journey to find myself and find enlightenment. But there was no clear path, and people had professed so many different ways to get there, some of them trying to say that their way was the right way. Well, the 10-year-old me didn't know any better, so I set off trying to explore through meditation, through mindfulness, through reading, through academics, through practices in spiritual and religious practices, in what people call the occult practices, and all of that. And over the years, I found that I was more confused, more unsure of myself, still feeling the emotional pain, still very confused about who I was, what my journey was. But nevertheless, my search persisted. And the more I looked, the more I seemed to find the goal even more confusing and elusive. Like, what is enlightenment? What is finding yourself? What does that even mean? As I grew up, I spent a lot of time then. I looked into the academic field, studied a range of academic subjects such as philosophy, theology, looked at dreams, psychology, films, economics. I mean, I'm not even kidding you. Political science. I've gone to some of the most prestigious universities internationally, wanted to understand how the world works, how why we fight, why there's conflict. So studied international relations, studied post-war reconstruction, studied the classics, war, peace building, folklore, mythology, religion. There's just so much that I thought I needed to understand. But here's the thing: the more I looked, the more elusive things seemed. And even though I gained knowledge in terms of helping me have intelligent action and conversations, true inner wisdom still seemed to evade me. It was elusive. The more I tried finding out, the more I kind of realized how little I knew about the world and about people and about suffering and about grief and conflict. And I was left exactly where I had started, just being unsure of myself, very unclear, very unsure about the next steps to take. I went into filmmaking and decided I wanted to make films on political subjects, historical subjects. But again, because I didn't realize anything about the world and nothing could make sense on why things are the way they are, I eventually decided that I was going to study international relations and conflict. And I did that for a few years. Then I worked a little while in policy um, and diplomacy. But then I realized that I didn't want to work at a policy level or a research level. I wanted to work therapeutically with people. And that's when in 2015 I decided to convert to psychology, and I went to the University of St Andrews in Scotland, a beautiful place, beautiful university, and did my conversion in psychology, which then led me to Trinity College in Dublin to do my doctorate in counselling psychology. And over the next 5 years, between 2015 and 2020, I worked really hard to become a fully qualified counseling psychologist. And during those years, I spent a lot of time in, well, taking therapy myself as part of the training process, but also to kind of dive into the abyss of my own psyche and learn to deconstruct all the different identities that had been built up over the years, some by my own experiences, some other labels put on me and things that I believed, other people's not always positive, whether it was bullies in school or not very kind teachers or adults in my life, but also some nice ones who created an identity around who I was. But it was really about deconstructing that and then reconstructing that identity to remove the constructs, remove what was constricting my growth and reconstruct pathways that allowed me to reconnect with myself and find myself, to kind of free myself from, I like to say, the golden shackles of my own making, and to confront key existential issues like death and grief and suffering and meaning and isolation and responsibility. It really looked into these processes. I learned so much from my clients. I worked in different psychological institutions, worked with adults, children. I worked in the prison service, worked in corporate psychology, and I learned so much from people. Having those conversations, listening to them, processing that experience and relating it to my own as well taught me so much. Over the next few years, I found that I was able to gradually begin letting go of this need to find myself and look for something, as if something was actually outside of me that I was looking, and I simply dropped my search to find myself. And that's when something extraordinary happened. Now, this is where it gets difficult to actually talk about it and put it in words, but I'm going to try. Um, expressing myself here, that one morning just before dawn in August of 2022, after many nights of dark and strange dreams, an unexpected sense of awakening came. Now, this is where it gets tricky to actually talk about this and express it in words, because it's actually something that I find is quite indescribable. It's like the experience of love. No matter how I try to put it in words, in a theoretical way, in an academic way, in describing it, you will not experience what I mean by love. Similarly, it's like telling somebody the seawater is salty. What does that knowledge actually provide you? I mean, you can understand that intellectually, but it doesn't give you the experience of it. It's only in actually going to the sea and tasting the water for yourself that you can realize, oh, this is it. That's what the experience of awakening, if I may say so, is as well. You have to experience that. But anyway, I'll try continuing speaking in words for the moment. A few days after this experience, I wrote a small paragraph on my old blog, on my old website, in a very naive attempt to describe this new experience. And reading the words again, just for this podcast, I was laughing earlier at my childish attempt to describe what actually is indescribable, but I still want to reproduce it here exactly as I wrote it back in August 2022, um, and share that with you. So I wrote, and it goes like, it's only quite recent that I've become aware that I am and that I am not. For long, I've been looking for myself without knowing what it is that I've been looking for. Often, still, it's only when the writer is in stillness, stillness in thought, in body, in contemplation, in feeling, that a momentary glimpse of what I am is witnessed. The writer doesn't yet have the words to describe that which is beyond the eye. It is a witness in stillness, a mind looking at itself, perhaps not quite clearly yet, but as if though patiently waiting for the ripples in the water to still, so that the reflection becomes true. These ripples are the rise and fall of thoughts, feelings, sensations, desires, hope, dreams, lust, fantasies, emotions, judgment, and so much other that hides away the clarity. These ripples rise within me and they fall within me. Sometimes they are me, yet the writer can't let go of them anymore because there's nothing to hold anymore. But sometimes they still hold me. Then the writer notices them and they go back to from where they came. I was once looking for myself. There is now one that is looking at oneself. 25th of August 2022. Oh, it still makes me laugh because, anyway, over the next few months, I more of those remaining clouds kind of lifted, and it became a lot more clear, the experience. And then I wrote in January of 2023 the following lines. I'll read you exactly. Again, words don't describe it. Think of this like the moth chasing a flame. I can dance with words around the light, but I'm really trying to point you to the light. And that's what's important. Don't get lost with my words. But anyway, I wrote in January 2023, there is emptiness. The residual self is learning to undivide, returning all to emptiness. Not perhaps in truth, but unable to find any other way to describe this at the moment. 20th of January 2023. And the reason I wrote not perhaps in truth is exactly what I was telling you earlier, that you can't describe the experience in words. If I was to tell you about the moon and moonlight and what it looks like and how calming it is and how cool it is and how beautiful it is, it would make no difference at a theoretical level, at the level of words. The experience of actually being under the moonlight, seeing the moon for yourself, is what I'm talking about. And I might try and point to the moon, but as the Zen story says, please don't look at my fingers, look at what they are pointing to. But anyway, strangely, it's because of the nature of this awakening that I also realized the profound importance of working with death, grief, and loss as doorways to transformation, and perhaps also as a monumental step needed in this world for healing. It's actually no wonder that such elaborate rituals and ceremonies were attached to the experience of death and dying in the ancient world, along with the ancient mysteries surrounding death, resurrection, and eternal life. But these realizations also guided me in the next steps of my journey, which was to specialize and work towards supporting people experiencing bereavement, grief, and loss. And as I said earlier, loss can mean many things. But because these experiences can feel quite challenging and people can feel really alone in that experience, I wanted to set something up that specializes supporting people experiencing loss and grief, but also not just getting over grief, because you don't get over, it transforms, but to take that steps as a deeper transformation of the self itself, moving towards what we can say is self actualization or self transformation, but eventually to enter new realms of self transcendence. This is what has led me to now reach out, create this podcast, create the Garden of Sacred Tears as a space for supporting people experiencing loss, and who are in need for non judgmental, empathic, caring, and compassionate support as they go through their own journeys of grief, loss, and self transcendence. That's a little bit about me. That's a little bit about the Garden of Sacred Tears. I'm really glad to be here with you, and know that you will always receive compassion and care and empathy. So if you are in a journey of grieving or loss or bereavement, do reach out to the Garden of Sacred Tears. And that's a space where we'll try and work on that transformation, on that healing, in terms of the experience, not just words. So many of us are fed up of being told what to do and what's right and to become better. And this is not the place for that. And I wouldn't have even set this podcast up, to be honest, except that I find a way to communicate what is actually not communicatable, um, as an invitation. This podcast, this website, all of this is an invitation to invite people who are in that journey of grief and loss and who want to experience or want to move towards self transformation and self transcendence to be there, and for me to be able to support them in any way that I can to cross that journey. Well, that's all really for from me today. Thank you once again, and I will be back with another conversation soon. Take good care of yourself. Until next time, yours truly.